David Moburg.
Right now, there's a great deal of discontent in the electorate with the two parties, partly evidenced by very low turnout, low registration of voters, low turnout, but also polls show, depending on how the question is posed, that something on the order of maybe 40% or more of the population would like to see another party, or so they say. And indeed, Ross Perot, in his presidential bid last time, got about 19% of the vote. So there is a substantial discontent. Another party would presumably organize some of that discontent, provide an alternative, provide motivation for those who do not now vote, perhaps. It would also perhaps provide a distinction that does not exist. The tendency now of the two parties is always to take the base somewhat for granted and move to the center in running elections. Although, in fact, the Republicans have succeeded by being more ideological over the last 15, 20 years.
And if a new Labour Party is to succeed, what is the major issue Labour unions need to tackle? David Moburg again.
One of the things that's evident, shows up a lot in surveys, work, studies of workers' opinions and interviewing with workers, is that an awful lot of workers are just very confused about the new world that they live in, that they don't really have a handle on how to explain what's going on, not even in a kind of a crude sense, of the them versus us, it's the bosses against us workers. And I mean, not even anything at that level, let alone something more sophisticated. So when they're under attack and losing their jobs and feeling threatened, they are very vulnerable to all kinds of explanations, that it's the immigrants coming, or it's the blacks on welfare, or who knows what else, it's the foreigners, it's the taxes are too high, government can't do anything right. I mean, all these kind of simple appeals from the right have a lot of resonance, particularly from people who don't have any kind of alternative understanding and explanation. So I think the first thing that has to be done is kind of a massive job of organizing, teaching union members and their families themselves about what's happening in the world.
Signe Gleason explains what the role of women in the new Labour Party might be.
What I hope is that Labour Party advocates in the Labour Party will be inclusive of all individuals. And so it's hard for me to think of a special role for women as distinct for a special role for any particular group. I think that hopefully it's going to be an inclusive group and offer opportunity for all people who have well-reasoned positions to advocate those positions and to be spokespersons for those positions. In terms of women's particular interest in Labour Party advocates or the Labour Party, I think that essentially my hope is that the Labour Party will be seen as a party to advocate, just as we say that workers need equitable wages, we're looking for a society that treats all people equitably. And the reality, in my view, is that there are going to be fewer and fewer workers because our world is changing. Technology, I believe, is changing the world of work forever. And not everybody will be a worker, I don't believe, but I think we still have the resources in our society and in all societies to distribute more equitably the resources that we have. And women's, I think, particular investment in a Labour Party is that often the burdens of caring for people in a society when the government abdicates its responsibility falls on the shoulders of women. So that in the case of health care, when people are discharged from the hospital prematurely, often the care of those people in the home does fall on women. Inadequate child care and women's ability to work, and the fact that we don't have an adequate child care system, again, puts a larger burden on women. So I think women do have a special role to play, and can benefit from a strong labor party if we focus on the principles of an equitable society and not just for workers, but expand the idea of what a labor party is about.
If voters wish to see a new Labour Party, they will also hope that this is reflected in improvements within labour unions on issues such as diversity. The Service Employees International Union, which represents 1.2 million manual workers around the country, has been at the forefront in reforms on these issues. Willie Hampton explains.
Local 79 represents 17,000 members statewide, large healthcare union, hospitals and nursing homes. We also represent building service. We represent stadium employees for Detroit Tigers, as well as racetrack employees. And we do have some public sector for school boards and Genesee Road County Commission employees. I think the convention has been very rewarding, very refreshing. The first of this year, there was over 300 African Americans that met in Atlanta, Georgia, and talked about progressive changes for African Americans, along with other members throughout SEIU. And those resolutions were submitted to the International Union, and they was adopted. The African American agenda consisted of representation from each region, being the Central States, being the Eastern region, and being the Western region, that we continue to have 3 international vice presidents, and that we have more people on the executive board and in other departments, that true diversity be from the top up and from the top down. And there were significant improvement in those areas, which we're proud. We hopefully would accomplish for our members nationwide more involvement, more empowerment for them within our union. I think it's also we was able to create a new executive vice president, which consists of African American, Pat Ford, who is good for the entire union and was an executive board member prior. And that improved the new voices slate, being more diversified. Our union now looks more like the members that we represent. This means more training, more education. It means growth. It means more political action. It means better wages, hours, and working conditions. It would affect those families that's in the balance. Mean more scholarship programs for our members and their children. So we think that we will continue to be successful as an international union and one of the most fastest growing international union, and will continue to improve that, being the 3rd largest international union in the AFL-CIO.
Frank Rosen believes the attitude of unions to racism is positive.
Organizational entity in this country that is more open to the question of not discriminating against people and of being inclusive than the labor movement. The most segregated hour in the United States is 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning when people go to church. And the most integrated organizations that you will find are those of the labor unions. The law requires us to represent everybody in a bargaining unit. It's not like it can be divided up like it can in Europe, and I think that's positive as far as I'm concerned. And the reality is, and it's not the same everywhere, but the reality is that the labor movement has made far greater strides on the questions of leadership and integrating into its ranks everybody who are members of their organizations than any other political groupings or organizational groupings in the United States. But that will be a fundamental part of our program, and it is a fundamental part of the leadership that is being put together.
Willie Hampton says that people should focus more on the failure of political administrations which have consistently failed workers.
I truly believe in, if you look traditionally, we've been very loyal to the Democratic Party. They have not been able to deliver, in some cases, what our goals were, the Republican Party. Some of those have been more liberal in those areas than Democrats, and vice versa. And I think that we may need a third party. The two parties right now, I would say 75% is not worth anything. I mean, they listen to national sentiment. They do not do the best for the will of the country, in my opinion. And I certainly would support a third party.
According to Frank Rosen, support has grown for the new party over the past 5 years.
Under the initiative of the oil, chemical, and atomic workers and other groups in the western part of the United States, it was a logical move for them because they had concluded strikes for them are very difficult because these refineries are highly automated and they can run for a long time before they break down when they put the supervisors in to run them for them. And they have to have political solutions to some of these problems. And they concluded they weren't going to get them out of Washington at the way things stand. In addition, I think Tony Mazzocchi is a man of, besides of considerable ability, considerable willingness to persevere. And he has stayed at it and worked at it. And with the help of his union, put the necessary resources into it to build a skeleton, at least, of people who would also come to the same conclusions. Many of us, myself personally, I worked for Henry Wallace in 1948 and probably supported a number of third-party candidates since then. Nothing ever happens after the elections. And the direction and the strategy this time is different. This time the strategy is build the party and then start running candidates for office. And since the other approach didn't work, this seems like a logical way to try something different. And is resonating, obviously, in the labor movement. We now have well over the membership of the unions who have endorsed Labor Party advocates now number over 1 million. So we're approaching 7% of organized labor right now.
There is going to be all sorts of teething problems which a new Labour Party will need to address. David Moburg explains.
Well, I'm skeptical because of these kind of structural conditions of American political system that, added a lot of, there's simply a lot of legal barriers to third parties, but even more there's this way in which if you are a minority party, then you can't really win a toehold in government very easily. And so what we have in a way are two parties that represent coalition governments. So there are different parties within the parties, and then they form their coalitions before the election rather than after the election. And I think that leaves very little room for effective third parties. You have these kind of anomalies in a way, like with Ross Perot, who may simply have enough money, that he's able to change the rules of the game to some extent. But on the whole, it is extremely difficult for third parties to break through. The role that a third party can play is to raise issues. The role that a third party could also play is, if indeed we're at a period where there's a realignment of politics and where the Democratic and Republican coalitions are being rejuggled, then that third party could influence from the outside.
The chances of a third party succeeding under the present rules of the game look slim. So what, if anything, can be learned? Frank Rosen.
The pressure that went on in the 30s was not from the unions. it was from the unemployed, huge numbers of unemployed, and these huge demonstrations frequently followed by many hundreds of people or thousands breaking into grocery stores and other places and helping themselves. I mean, that was the milieu in which Roosevelt came to power and had the common sense to recognize that he had to do something to give some ground.
Can a new Labour Party learn anything from history then?
Oh, I think it will. I am impressed by the, I'm one of the senior citizens in this movement. I'm 70 years old. We're seeing lots of 35 and 40 years old coming in and are part of the leadership of this thing already. We've had a couple of national bodies that have been meeting to plan this thing. And we find I find a number of young, articulate people in a number of unions are beginning to step forward, and that's what the future requires. Now, are they going to get old, gray, and stodgy in the process? They probably will. But isn't that the history of human development seems to be birth, growth, stagnation, and demise. And political institutions are not exempt from that. Neither are companies, I might add. We've seen a lot of that too. And I'm not advocating the Labor Party as a panacea for all the ills of mankind or all the ills of the American people. I advocate it as the next step forward.
Willie Hampton believes that a new Labour Party has to let people know what the issues are in clear, concise terms.
But I think that we have to do a lot of education in our community and deal with the issues and not tell people how to vote, but let them know the difference in the issues so that they can make an intelligent decision themselves. And understanding the importance of it, that they vote do count, and they can make a change by casting their ballot.